Just a Duet. A show choir, Percabeth, alternate universe fanfiction, part 1. What do you mean, I have a new partner? Annabeth cried. She stared at her director, who gave her a sympathetic smile. I'm afraid to say that Luke has gotten himself in a bit of trouble, and this has a suspension. As you know, it takes him out of the show. Annabeth wants to rip that blonde boy's head off. It was barely 2 months to a comp season, and now he decides that it was time to do whatever he did that was so utterly stupid that he got a suspension for it. Yes, thank you, Luke. Great timing. Just lovely. Annabeth ran a hand through her hair. So, what are we supposed to do about the duet? I can't just turn it into a solo in such short notice, she exclaimed. Mr. Brunner, the Halftones show choir director, smiled sympathetically at her, which only meant one thing. And it made Annabeth want to slam her head onto one of the block boxes. I really am getting a new partner, aren't I? She said miserably. He nodded. Sighing, Annabeth slumped her posture. All right. Are we holding auditions again or something? Actually, we have someone in mind who knows the part and can step in. Oh, well, that's good. And that's how Annabeth found herself in this situation that she was in, waiting for her new partner on a Saturday morning, because they needed as much extra practice as they could possibly fit in. She tapped her fingers patiently on the music stand in front of her. Whenever is this new partner of hers coming? Looking at the clock, Annabeth huffed. They were supposed to start 15 minutes ago, and she had work at 4. Finally, the door squeaked open and in walked a boy with jet black hair and a very apologetic smile on his face. Annabeth frowned deeply. He pulled out a very roughened and falling apart binder, and it practically fell into the chair next to her. She wanted to scoff. This kid was a total disaster, and this is who Mr. Brunner wanted to replace Luke with. Better yet, this really was the best second choice for the solo duet. No wonder Luke had gotten it over him. Luke at least had commitment and punctuality. She then thought of his suspension, and Annabeth felt herself blanch. Okay, yeah, maybe time management meant nothing when a suspension was involved. Hey, sorry for being late. I got caught up. The boy rushed out. Mr. Brunner smiled nicely while Annabeth raised a brow at him and sized this newcomer up. His shirt was some school spirit shirt that had so many paint stains on it she couldn't even make out what the words were supposed to be. Not only that, his hair looked like a hurricane styled it blindly, and his pants had a hole in it that were definitely not stylistic. It was a total 180 from Luke, who was just as perfect and put together as she was. No worries, Mr. Brunner waved off. How about you two try and do one run-through, and we'll see where we need to work from there. Annabeth looked at him with disdain, but obliged. She pulled out her sheet music, checking over all the dynamics and reminding herself how long to hold up notes. The kid stood next to her, shuffling out a crumpled sheet music out of his bag. Annabeth turned up her nose at the mess. Sorry, he said with an annoying amount of carelessness. I'm Percy. I know you're Annabeth, he said, bringing out a hand for her to shake. She looked at the hand and gingerly shook it for just a second. She really didn't want to touch him for longer than he needed to be. Ironic, considering the fact that there was a lift in the choreography they were supposed to do and practice a myriad of times. It's fine, she said with a slight amount of hostility. Whether he registered or not, it really didn't matter to her because the intro music was playing. She prayed that he at least knew when to come in. I don't need you to sell me on reasons to want you, Annabeth sang, watching as Percy made motions with his arms. He wasn't looking at her. Instead, he was focused on the music. Out of the corner of her eyes, she saw Mr. Brunner had a big and proud smile on his face. I never thought there'd be someone like you who'd want me. Oh. So he did know what he was doing. And this kid, Percy's voice wasn't bad at all. Annabeth stared at him with silent shock. He continued to sing with a beautiful baritone voice. By the end of the song, Annabeth was very surprised, and pleasantly so. Not that she even showed it on her face. You're not awful, she commented stiffly to Percy, acting as if she was merely observing from an unbiased standpoint. He smirked at her. I hope not, he joked. That would kind of ruin the entire show, don't you think? He said snarkily. Annabeth quirked her lips up and nodded. Don't ruin the show, she warned him with venom in her eyes. Percy nearly shrugged. I don't intend to. As it turned out, practicing and working with Percy was an absolute pain to do, to say the least, and genuinely soul-crushingly awful to do, to say the most. Percy wasn't trying to sabotage the show or anything. If he was, though, he hid it very well. There was just something about him that seemed like he just didn't care enough about the show and what they were trying to do. He'd often come barreling in after being 30 minutes late, saying some freaking apologies, and Mr. Brunner would just wave it off. But then the next day, the same thing repeated itself, and Annabeth would grit her teeth in annoyance. Everyone and their mother knew that show choir was a contract, and you had to be serious about it. Percy was treating it like it was some kind of fun playdate. Don't worry about it, Percy. Just go to your blocking at the end of the boys' song. Mr. Brunner yet again let Percy off the hook. As much as Annabeth loved her director, he was a gosh darn enabler to Percy's bad habits. Some of the girls around her began to whisper, and Annabeth rolled her eyes. What was so special about Percy that they needed to speak like he was a celebrity? Was he even in JV? I don't think so. My sister was JV last year, and she had no idea who he was. He just came out of the blue and got the solo. Annabeth snorted to no one except for herself. Percy only got the solo because Luke made a dumb mistake. Her eyes trailed over the back of the choreography where Percy was blocked. He wasn't... Okay. Honestly, he wasn't too awful at dancing, and his facials were pretty good for some random new recruit or whatever he was. She nodded slightly. Mr. Brunner may have picked a flake to be her new partner, but at the very least, it was a talented, half-committed flake. And for the time crunch, it was good enough. Then he has to be new this year. Who gets into varsity their first year? Did anyone even watch his audition? No idea. None of the other guys really knows him either. I was talking to Ethan while the center circle was doing their dance break, and he said no one even knew who he was when they reblocked the boys' song. Apparently, he just came from the back. At once, their dance choreographer shushed them, and the chatter all stopped. It was time to practice the girls' song, and everyone gave a collective groan. It wasn't like they didn't like the girls' song. It was kind of the opposite. Everyone loved the girls' song the most. The issue was that the dance break was intense and stole everyone's breath, so then the next verse always came out breathy and barely audible. 45 minutes later, Annabeth was finally free, and she, along with Piper, Selena, and Hazel, collapsed into a heap on the floor. They certainly weren't the only ones, but considering the fact that they were in the middle, they were quite prominent. Mr. Brunner stopped by with a playful laugh, telling them to get up and get some rest tonight. "You killed me," Annabeth deadpanned. Piper cackled next to her. Mr. Brunner just smiled back at them. "God, I wonder why we do all of this," Selena said in a pained voice. "For the dancing," Hazel supplied. Piper nodded wistfully. "For the dancing," she repeats. Annabeth rolled her eyes at her friends. "I mean, I'm here for the singing." They all collectively clamored over her, saying, "We know." Most people end up making friends with their blocking neighbors during the season. They were the only ones that truly understood your pain, whether it was because you all nearly fell off the back riser or because you were in the center circle with the most complicated footwork possible. Only they understood it, and that was a bond for forever. Hazel, Piper, and Selena happened to be her blocking partners back in freshman year. They'd all been the only freshman girls to make the full SATB varsity show choir. Annabeth already knew from middle school. But Hazel and Piper were new friends, and they all quickly became close. They always had sleepovers the night before competitions because Hazel lives so close by the school, and they just didn't want to wake up at 4 a.m. if they had another option. "Suffocation! I love it!" Selena's stagehand friend and head manager Clarissa said in a wicked tone. Annabeth mothered death threats that were good enough to make the former smile. "Not too much, though. I still need my calc homework help." Her friend Rachel grinned, a prop and stagehand. Annabeth sent her a glare. Eventually, Annabeth found her way out of the dog pile, and she fixed her appearance a bit before heading home. Selena, Piper, and Hazel were all bouncing beside her. Those freaking snakes. "So, how's it working with Percy?" Selena asked. Annabeth shrugged. "Could be worse, but it could also be better." Piper raised a brow. "How so?" "He's always late. Not just to weekly practices, but also to our individual practices. And Bruno just brushes it off. He's not bad at singing or dancing, though, so at least there's that, but God, I can't very well wait 20 minutes every single time we practice the ballad. I have AV homework to do," Annabeth complained. "Well," Hazel trailed off, "he does have a tendency to show up late, but he seems nice." "I mean, he is that, but that still doesn't excuse his tardiness," Annabeth admitted. Her friends all nodded in agreement. Being nice was good and all, but if a ninth person had no commitment, it didn't matter. As it turned out, there was a valid excuse to why Percy was late all of the time, and Annabeth only found it out 2 weeks later, when she was called in for an impromptu practice. When she got the text from Brunner, she'd groaned and rolled herself out of bed, where she had planned on staying all weekend. It was 9:16 in the morning, and she wanted to sleep. Still, Annabeth dragged herself out to her car, and in no time she was in the dance room, yawning her head off with a cup of coffee in hand. Brunner grinned at her. Annabeth, thank you for coming in on such short notice," he said kindly. Annabeth shrugged it off. "Yeah, that's show choir for you," she said tiredly. Idly, she wondered how long she could nap for before Percy showed up. Her best guess was about an hour before he comes barreling in with a sorry. But much to her surprise, she never got that nap. "Hey, sorry about all the water." There was Percy, standing in the doorway. His jet black hair was absolutely soaked with water that is now dripping onto the ground. His shirt has some patches of damp spots, and his chest is heaving with exhaustion. I had to tell my coach that this was a co-curricular and it takes over practice, but he was not happy with me. No worries, Percy. Come take a minute. You look tired, Bruner said. Percy practically crashed onto the couch with a huge sigh. Annabeth stared at him, utterly bemused. So, Percy swam. He had been swimming before this practice and had to rush to get here. Maybe she had been judging him too quickly. Maybe he had been committed, just to two overlapping things. Are you a swimmer? Annabeth asked before she could control her mouth. Percy looked at her and laughed a bit. Yeah, all my life. I practice all the time. Luckily, I was up for a water break when we were doing a bunch of sets with worst stroke, but distance, so I'm actually pretty glad I got this text. I so wanted out of it. As Percy talked, Annabeth quietly thought to herself. She knew that she'd always been a judgy person. That was something she got from her mom, but she had really misjudged Percy. He wasn't flaky, not at all. He was just trying his best to do all of the things he had committed to doing. He went to his practices, but when he knew that Shokar needed him, he rushed over right away. Annabeth sighed to herself and decided that maybe she should give Percy a chance. He seemed kind of dumb, but he was still nice, and without the worry that he was a non-committing person who played Shokar just to pass the time, she was willing to give him that chance. Percy was better than she originally gave him credit for, and maybe she should start to do so now.